1.25 beyond the wall. Huge pool that eventually was covered with an arch and transformed into a cistern. You see the difference between a pool and a cistern? When you are in the valley, rain is collected. If you build a dam, you get a pool. It's used for water. Then, at a later time, in the Roman period, they built an arch over it because they wanted a new pavement. And the pool became a cistern. Now it was underground. When we are in Israel, when we are in this land, hey Siri.
Just keep track.
Oh, even the current day. Some people run for 2 days, 3 days, so they know what day it is. Are we there yet? So there was a pool that was used as don't forget, double use. It was a pool, that means a reserve of water, and of course it was part of the moat. Clever. And it belonged to a big fortress that was called the Antonia. Why is it called Antonia? It's named after Antonino Caesar. No, that's before the Caesar. It's just before. General, you can call him. Remember, he was part of a union of three. There were three who were ruling just before the empire.
Right.
Octavian, who will become Augustus Caesar, Antony, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. Three generals who were sharing the commandment of Rome. Eventually, one wants to be the first one, gets rid of the other, and that's Octavian, who takes the title. By the way, Augustus is not also a name, means someone of imposing stature, somebody important. Augustus Caesar, Octavian was his name. Okay, so the first one who named Herod as a king was actually Antony. And the one who made him a great king was Augustus. So the first thing, when Herod started building the temple, he built a tower at the northwest corner that he named after his benefactor, after Antony. It was known as the Antonia Fortress, northwest corner of the temple, in more or less in the area we are. Now the problem, it was a Roman garrison. The Roman garrison, that means that was Rome, like the embassy of Rome. You know, at one of the most sensitive places in Jerusalem, overlooking the temple. Now you would say the Roman will keep low profile because of the holiness, of the sanctity of the place. Read Josephus Flavius, it's the exact contrary. So Josephus say horrible things. He say how the Roman soldiers were spitting on the people down there. Remember, people were coming to the house of the Lord, and there were Roman soldiers making sure that the owner of the place is Rome, not God, not anybody else. Spitting on the people, urinating on the people, showing their private parts, doing all kinds of horrible things just to show their disrespect of the place. So that was like an open sore to the Jews. You come to the temple, but you cannot avoid seeing the Roman overlooking on you and showing the ugly face of the occupation. No surprise that in 66, when the rebellion starts, it starts on the temple. And what is the first position the Jews take? The Antonia. They just storm the Antonia. They are Roman soldiers, but they cannot do much against a huge crowd. And the soldiers are just thrown down, and the Antonia will become a bastion for the Jews for the rebellion. Eventually, the Romans, after 3 years of fighting and siege, will take back the Antonia, and Titus will destroy it together with the temple in year 70. So Antonia is destroyed. Then 100 years later, there's another 50 years later, we're talking about 132. 50 years later, another rebellion led by Bar Kokhba. Also, same fate. The Roman crushed the rebellion, but this time they razed the city to the ground and built something else. Now the moat of the Antonia was a pool, and you always need water in Jerusalem. Any city needs water all the time. And so Adrian wanted to remind his name as a victorious person. He built a big forum. What is a forum? Forum. A market. Just a market. The big forum is in this area. He takes stone from the Antonia, from all the ruined buildings, and he makes a huge pavement. And in the center of this pavement is, of course, becomes the place of the market. And in the center of this pavement, a big triumphal arch. That's the arch we saw outside. It's still there standing. No, time is passing, and then the Roman become Christian. Okay? Now the pilgrimage are starting. So tradition starts that maybe Jesus was brought to the Antonia, because we know that Jesus was brought to Pontius Pilate, and there were soldiers, it was a fortress, so maybe that's there. And so they started to look for the signs. And one of them was the arch. And they said, that's surely the gate of the Antonia. They could literally picture themselves, Pontius Pilate with Jesus, and presenting Jesus to the accuser. Remember the guards of the priest, maybe the priest, and some crowd there, and he says, what does he say? Ecce Homo, in the Latin way. Behold the man. Ecce Homo. That's the name of the arch and the name of the convent where we are. Ecce Homo. And that became known as the gate of the Antonia, the Ecce Homo arch, and that's how pilgrims over the time started to refer to it. Even today, traditionally, because with the excavation today, we know was built. It's not the gate of the Antonia, it's the triumphal arch. It's not connected to any building, it was just freestanding in the middle of the marketplace. Okay? So it was built 100 years after the crucifixion. It is not from the Antonia. I want to tell you that the sister asked the archaeologists to come and prove what was the tradition. They got not a good answer they expected. They did not expect, but they accepted. And even they have places to explain exactly with plan that it is a Roman arch from Adrian, not from the time of Jesus, and so on. They're very clear about that. They don't want to twist the story. It goes against the tradition, but they prefer the archaeology. And that is a good point in their favor. So that's where, so now where are we? In the area of the Antonia. We cannot exactly say where of the Antonia because it was dismantled and then the stones were used for paving of the forum, but some of the stones of the forum are still there, and what more, they found engraving on the stone. And these engravings are usually made by soldiers. These are games, you know, they play with dice, all kind. One of the most famous games that we see is called the Game of the King, where they played with a puppet that was the king, and they made the king move stamps and they play the dice. And once a year, they could play the Game of the King in reality. On the holidays called Holidays of Saturn, the games of Saturn, you have a few holidays like that especially the Roman army had. They could have a man who is condemned to death or a slave that was given to them, and they will play the Game of the King with that man. At the end of the day, they will put him to death. But during the whole day, they will treat him as a king. But not exactly as a king. They will bow to him. Caesar, that's the only time when you can say bad things about Caesar. The discipline was so strong. So it's like the emperors knew how to let the steam off. Once a year, you can say whatever you want against Caesar. You can even kill Caesar. So they had one man, they dressed him like a king or something like that, and they slapped him. You want some strawberries? Yes, say the poor man. They put stones in his mouth, this kind of thing. A day of torture, and eventually they will put him to death. Now, when you hear that story, that Roman soldiers did that, immediately comes to you the treatment that Jesus got when he was in the hands of the Romans. Remember that? All of a sudden, he's a king, the soldiers are there around him, they give him a crown, but not a real crown, a crown of thorns, all these. So that shows that Jesus got this so-called special treatment because for the first time the Romans, not in the game, they could play with another king. And they played the Game of the King with Jesus. It was not part of the punishment, we have to say. The punishment for declaring yourself king of the Jews was crucifixion. That was enough. The Romans had their time in the courtyard to play, again, quote unquote, with Jesus. That's something that is beyond the protocol. And we can now explain why Jesus was treated that way, because what a great thing. We have a real king. And anyways, this real king is going to die. So let's play the game of the king. And that probably explained what was that very, I would say, special treatment that Jesus got when he came to here. Not just condemned to death and sent, which was terrible already, sent to crucifixion, but all the abuse that he suffered before that. I don't believe it's an order of Pontius Pilate to say to the soldier, do that. He just did not care much, and the soldiers did what they do. Again, it looks like the story is compact. That can take hours. They are not going to tell you then 5 hours pass. Not all the time the governor has the time to treat or to condemn a prisoner. You take your time. He comes whenever he comes. Can take maybe days, we don't know. The story is compacted. It doesn't mean it happened. When you read it, you say, oh, in 2 hours. Why do you have a tribunal convening for you, if you are a simple person? That takes time. You're going to prison, maybe days, maybe months. So the story is contracted. We don't have the whole actual timeline. So Jesus was in prison for some time. Can be minutes, can be hours, maybe days. How do we know? So that's a little bit of the story that we're going to talk about. And all that to tell you that the pavement has been uncovered. You remember the pavement of the forum, of the marketplace? And some of the carvings are still visible. I will tell you in advance, almost not visible at all. In the beginning, I remember when I started guiding, we were coming here, we were literally with the groups walking on the pavement and showing the people. It's only when the signs started to disappear, then the sisters put fence around it. A little bit too late. But maybe you strain a little bit your eyes, you will see. Then we'll go there and then sit down, or sit down and go there. Yes, okay.